Okay, blockchain, Bitcoin, climate change, things that were beforehand not thought together in the early phases. This was the innovation of the century, but nowadays we hear a lot of negative things about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. Before I start, really, I actually wanted to make a poll, but I can't see anything. But I tried anyway. Which one of you or how many have cryptocurrencies or Bitcoin? Well, it's more than I thought. How many of you think Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies are a scam? You lost money? No, okay. Okay, it was just curious because it's becoming more and more people, and the situation is changing, but at the same time, we're getting more and more negative press or negative ideas what Bitcoin is actually doing to the climate, or is the potential what it could do, because it's still small on the monetary side and also on the energy side. Okay. What is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is a genius idea, and I analyzed a lot of data centers beforehand. So I am an energy economist by training, and we analyze everything. We go into each sector and try to understand how the dynamics work, how energy demand evolves, and just usually from a fairly top-down perspective. But for Bitcoin, it was someday different, because I really read also the paper of Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever he is. And I was really impressed. 8 pages, published in 2008, created such a huge system. And it's not only Bitcoin which he created a lot of more, because in the aftermath of Bitcoin and the success of Bitcoin, a lot of things more happened. I do not want to go into the details, but a few things we need to know, and we do not do on many mainstream myths. So what it replaces, what was the idea? It has a clear connection to the financial crisis, and so there was the idea really to create a new currency, so also a monetary system and so on, and a currency which does not need any central authority of trust. So that was the first idea, and that wasn't possible beforehand. So based on a peer-to-peer network, which is also decentralized, so actually things were tried beforehand, so we had BitTorrent, but we never made it to create a system of e-cash where we can pay and prevent the so-called double spending problem. But he put together as an architectural innovation a few things which were already there and used in a different context, and created of that Bitcoin. So, and if we now think what he created and what we compare it with, we always have to keep in mind what's the energy service he delivers. So usually you see a lot of Visa comparisons. But Visa has not the same properties, actually. If you compare it to Visa, Visa is not decentralized. Visa has a central authority of trust, and so has not really the fair comparison it is. Okay. Then, the actual topic, if you speak about the energy intensity of Bitcoin, it is usually referred to as mining. So Bitcoin mining is often misunderstood as the process of simulating mining gold or mining any precious metals. But this was not the original intention. The intention is actually, this is in the protocol, to actually create, to enable the decentralized payment system, say the magic internet money, so to say. And the incentive given that someone is willing to participate in this network with his computer, at the beginning as small computers, is rewarded with bitcoins that are issued. But this is not meant to simulate somehow a resource extraction path, as we economists know, maybe from wholesaling or something like that. So this is the whole idea behind that. And the Bitcoin mining is actually the validation. It enables that we can pay at all. It is not just about getting these Bitcoins. Of course, the incentive for the miners is just selfish. They want to have the Bitcoins and thereby enable the system and thereby increase the security of the system. This is actually how it works and how these few pieces put together. And it's astonishing. He published that in August 2008. The first Genesis block, so-called, was created in 2009 in January, and from there on we have seen a real roller coaster in this development, which we can see here. We had a lot of community around that. We had a lot of, say, political thoughts, libertarian, or right-wing, left-wing. You can find anything on philosophy about Bitcoin. This is a pretty famous meme which was created on the Reddit for Bitcoin, and it stayed there, I think, until 2 years ago, which simply called it magic internet money. It's funny, and it is also in several respects magic, and the mainstream attention actually always came with the bubbles. We had bubbles beforehand when we raised to $100 or something like that, and the latest bubble we have seen is basically the bubble in 2017, where we had 20,000 US dollars per Bitcoin to pay, which is pretty a lot if you consider that the first Bitcoins were mined on laptops and anything else. And I think you all know plenty of stories where people started to mine, forgot about that. When I moved to Berlin, we had in Kreuzberg a Bitcoin coffee, where I actually always planned to go. I didn't do that, but maybe I had used the Bitcoins to drink beer or something like that. But all these stories are there, and this is fascinating people. It is enabling, say, illegal services, but also other services. WikiLeaks was dependent on that when the bank blockade was there, and there was no law, not law-based. It was just a policy saying WikiLeaks cannot get any funds anymore. This was the first use case, and as all technologies with robotics, you always have a dual-use problem. You can use it for good things, and you can use it for bad things, but it's not the technology's fault. All right. And of course, with increasing prices, a lot of people thought to jump into the mining business. And besides that, what we will see later, huge technology developments occurred, and the revenues for the miners increased a lot. So a huge business was created usually where electricity is cheap. And what we can see here, that the revenues in 17 and 18 were higher than all revenues beforehand. But there were also a lot of capital investments beforehand, so that's not risk-free business. Okay, this is a common fact. I just want to rehearsal that. Okay, most of Bitcoin mining takes place in China. There's had several reasons. One reason is, of course, electricity is cheap there, and it is not the original intention to get coal there. Also, aluminium is there, and if you look, for example, at other industries like polysilicon or anything else, you will find also the concentration in all these areas where electricity is cheap, and a lot of things also in China. But this is basically true, and it's still the majority of miners are there, of hardware producers also, and the miners. All right. But there are also different stories you can see there. There are some as renewables. If you go to the grid electricity, you have some famous stories as the Bitcoin mining coal in Inner Mongolia in Ordos, which is an industry or a ghost city, a famous ghost city with overcapacity. But you also have it there where hydroelectricity is abundant. And this is just to point out that you can look at a country, but within a country you still have also differences. Okay, so now we have a bit of the background now to see that, and then a thing which triggered me, because I did research on that, was an article which was published last year and stating that Bitcoin alone could push climate change above 2 degrees. Wow. This is a lot, and this is the first thing I thought, okay, let's see what he has calculated, because I always did ex-post analysis, and no one could forecast this, because then I would be rich and wouldn't be here, or maybe then I would be here in a different manner. But this is a thing no one can, and this is pretty difficult. So let's see what is there. And the 2 degrees target is quite a big thing to hit for just one technology. Even for one sector, I would say, let's see how that works. This triggered me in the first place, and so we looked up what he did, and he did simply what we could summarize what's written there, just to prove it also. It's an extrapolation of the situation in 2017. And then, which I'll later show, he didn't understand really the Bitcoin protocol. And then he arrived at this conclusion. This is the main fact he has, and he has 3 steps in there. So he said this frozen efficiency, what we have seen in 2017 in terms of technology, and technology improvement is the same in 2100. This is anyone who has seen the prices going up and down, and certainly also this has a movement on the technology, but it's okay. These assumptions can be made. The second one is he went a step further in terms of assumption. He did not only estimate the electricity consumption, but also estimates what is behind the electricity consumption. So what resources are used to produce electricity. And this is also, and the last step is then to extrapolate this. And the assumption is to say that he was so curious to see that all cashless transactions worldwide will be handled in Bitcoin. This was this assumption, and he developed the diffusion path to this, and this about 300 and a bit billion transaction. This was the final goal. That would mean all Bitcoin magic, Reddit fantasies would have become true. And let's look at the results. He did another thing on technology development. He thought that Bitcoin will evolve in a way many technologies will increase before technology diffusion, like the dishwasher. I don't know why he emphasized this one. Then credit card, electricity, and so on. And this is always the adoption rate. And years since introduction, we have many technologies which pretty fast diffuse into the system, but dishwashers apparently take somewhat longer. And based on this diffusion path, this determines the diffusion velocity of Bitcoin as a cashless transaction payment form. He developed this path, what we see here. So what we see here, these are the cumulated Bitcoin emissions only. He started with all emissions that were beforehand, so global emissions since 1860, and then extrapolated just the Bitcoin emissions into the future. And arrived at the conclusion that in 11 or 22 years, Bitcoin alone will at least scratch on this target of 2 degrees, which is the Paris Agreement or another agreement. And this is astonishing. Okay. What I did when I saw that in the first place, and it's maybe a thing which you always can do, we all have to deal with model results, with prognosis, with forecasts in the media. So this is science here, but also in anything else. You will see that. Just let us do the back of the envelope calculation. So he stated the amount of emissions there in a unit given, and this is the budget we actually have, the carbon budget. Our government is not willing to define for Germany at the moment. The carbon budget we have worldwide, then we hit the 2 degrees threshold. Then I looked up, of course, that not everyone has this data ready, looked up what's the power generation was in the same year in terms of CO2 emission, and then simply divided that to get an idea what is this of an order of magnitude. And what you see, or what I saw in the first night when I decided to really analyze that, is that above 60 years worth of electricity production in terms of CO2 emissions from the year 2017. Okay, and this will Bitcoin consume, so to say, in 16 years. So this is astonishing. And when I calculated further with my colleague, we also realized that all these scenarios to come true need kind of a tripling or doubling of electricity generation capacity worldwide. And this seems to be unrealistic. So we decided to write a reply and to dive deeper into that. So I did that with my colleague, and it was a hard way to get this through. We had several attempts, but now we have gone through that. And maybe we have 2 main critics on the adoption scenarios. So first is the Bitcoin scenarios, adoption scenarios, quickly surpass the possibility, the network possibility actually of Bitcoin. So Bitcoin can actually not handle this many transactions per year as they proposed. And they have no idea, or they didn't give any hint how this is solved, because this was actually the key challenge of blockchain in general. How to scale up, how to keep these numbers active. And they didn't say that, and this is about a factor 500 higher. And the second one is, which is a common myth about Bitcoin transaction or Bitcoin energy consumption, the energy consumption of Bitcoin is independent on the amount of transaction. Even if we have just one transaction per block in a blockchain, it will always be the same. If we pack more on that, we reduce the specific energy consumption per transaction. It's a bit like driving in a bus. If the bus driver is driving alone, the bus will consuming almost the same amount of fuel as if we pack it full of people. A bit like that, but with more complicated regimes. All right. Then we check the second one. The base year estimates if they are in the right ballpark. Because if you extrapolate to 2100 and say, I said, okay, frozen efficiency is an assumption, I did that hundreds of times just to explore something, that's okay, perfectly. But if you start with a base year estimates, which are already far away, so we have a number of estimates. This is one often in the media also criticized being too conservative, to overestimating electricity consumption. Then in the middle we have the Nature article, so the Mora article, and then we had a year ago already on a conference also an estimate which we now use to check that, which is also by far lower. So already in the beginning the extrapolation is by far too high. Then, but by far more important, if I go such a long distance in ICT technologies, we all know that ICT technologies evolve quickly. The question is, can I really assume frozen efficiency on mining technologies? What we see here is generations of mining technologies. So what we see here is the computational capacity measured in gigahash, so how many hashes they can solve, a cryptographic function, and related to the wattage, so the energy they or the power they consume, to that. So when Bitcoin mining started, we were around here, and it's a log scale. So look at the numbers and the factor of 1,000 we have here in between. So you could use your laptop, and you could, if you would have been the magic wizard and would have seen that it was high, could have mined a lot of Bitcoins already with your CPU, or then it switched already to the graphical processing unit then we had field programming arrays, and then we had specific CPUs which were just, or specific machines, application-specific programming unit, which were just developed and applied in the Bitcoin sector. So from the money earned in the Bitcoin sector or of venture capital, they developed those things and then used it in the sector. And if we can see here, this is a huge decrease in efficiency, increase in efficiency, decrease in intensity. And if you look at their data set, they use the random sampling from a large data set, but basically the average is already above, say, the transition to the mining industry. Until here you can say this was hobbyists, nerds, sitting at home and producing magic internet money. But then it shifted and becoming a huge industry, also followed by centralization. This is the result of that. So another thing is, which we quickly checked, because I checked that beforehand, I was interested, what is the money I have to spend on electricity to produce one Bitcoin? And usually I would assume that rational people would spend less money on producing it than the market value is. And then you see that there's high dynamics. Here again, this is the number of new miners introduced. This is a Chinese company, and he's by far the market leader in that. And he used huge generations of hardware, and you see quickly hardware gets kicked out of the market if you say that at least your electricity cost must be covered, otherwise I switch my Bitcoin miner off. So a number of stories are out there that they steal Bitcoins, steal electricity, but I think the majority simply has to pay. Even if they have to pay not a lot of money, they have to pay for their electricity. And what you see, what the article had, the miner fleet in the article was just above all the time in this area depicted here, above actually being economic at the electricity rate of $5. We know we can we can have a bit less in China, but 5 cents is a good ballpark estimate to say this is a low price. So this is also another argument. The economics of the system would prevent such a thing to happen, because someone has to pay for the electricity for this mining. So if you think this is a true development, you have to pay. The Bitcoin price has to increase, so sell everything and buy Bitcoins if you think this is true, or you think that has an inherent mechanism to prevent such a huge increase in electricity consumption, and that with their devastating impact on climate change, energy demand, and so on. And the conclusion. It's not the final aid or it will not kill our climate. Clearly, I didn't show that now because I'm too long already, I see. It is significant, also significant compared to Google or something else. But it is not, by far not the panic thing we should have. If we want to panic, there are a number of other sectors where we should panic on. But what you see is actually, and also when the reply was through, the panic article had a high clickbait. If you say, no, it's not, you shouldn't panic, no one is interested anymore. And this is one sold by a computer scientist in a funny way. He said it is by far harder to get rid of that, and you put much more energy on effort in that to do or to show the right numbers. But I think in this case it's an important thing to show because we cannot classify technologies on wrong conclusions, because a number of articles are out there we should say they said there should be regulatory consequences. And the last thing is to say, and I can encourage you, I'm now happy, it brought me to here, so it was a long, hard way to bring that through also, but we need much more research, and we should, because I couldn't open the innovation side, and we should not only see Bitcoin as just Bitcoin. It also supports, or is the US dollar for a large innovation system, where we of course have a number of startups which will fail, and a number of startups which might be the new unicorns. And therewith I would thank you for your attention.